The Cavern Club days we begin in 1957, when a teenage John Lennon forms a band called the Quarrymen, because nothing says future greatest band ever, like a name that sounds like a Minecraft update. A young Paul McCartney joins, then George, and later Pete Best. And by 1961, they are officially the Beatles, which sounds cool until you realize it's basically a pun about insects. Now fast forward to the Cavern Club, a sweaty, brick-walled basement where dreams are born, mostly because no one can afford real ventilation. They're paid in coins, sandwiches, and trauma. The crowd is half students, half factory workers, and one guy who's definitely only there because he got lost. Then comes Hamburg, the punishment arc. From 1960 to 1962, they play 7 to 8 hour sets nightly. Imagine performing so long that your fingers develop personality disorders. This is where they learn everything: stamina, chemistry, and how to stay awake on black coffee that absolutely wasn't just coffee. Pete Best drums like a beast, but the chemistry isn't there. By August 1962, the lads make the decision. Enter Ringo Starr, the final puzzle piece, the beard of destiny, the man who can make a hi-hat sound like a polite British greeting. This era ends with them ready for the big leagues, unpolished, hungry, and carrying more emotional baggage than their van. Club days, the yeah years, Beatlemania. 1963 arrives. Please Please Me becomes a hit. Then She Loves You. Then I Want to Hold Your Hand. And suddenly the world becomes a screaming competition. Beatlemania hits like a meteor. It's the original, undefeated K-pop level hysteria. Parents freak out. Priests complain. Teachers confiscate Beatles hair photos. The Beatles? They are just standing there like. By 1964, they conquer America on The Ed Sullivan Show and cause the largest outbreak of synchronized screaming in human history. Airports fill with fans. Hotels are besieged. Police officers visibly reconsider their careers. This is also when the Paul is dead whispers begin. Some fans swear he looks slightly different every Tuesday. And thus, the longest-running meme in music history is born. Through all this chaos, the Beatles still write hits like Can't Buy Me Love, A Hard Day's Night, Help. Fun fact, Help is literally John asking for help. Nobody noticed. This era is pure pop perfection, like a sugar rush mixed with British sarcasm. Rubber Soul era. By 1965, something in the Beatles shifts. The fame is still there. The money is there. The screaming fans are very there. But behind the scenes, the Beatles are quietly thinking, are we really just going to write I Love You? Yeah, forever? Is this sustainable? Why does every stadium sound like we're performing inside a jet engine? Their world had become so loud they couldn't even hear themselves on stage anymore. Literally, concerts were just four guys playing guesses and hoping it matched the beat. This frustration, exhaustion, and curiosity brew together and create something new. A version of the Beatles that actually thinks. A version that is bored of superficial pop. A version that wonders what lies beyond repeating choruses and matching suits. And then Rubber Soul happens. Released in December 1965, Rubber Soul isn't just an album. It's the Beatles discovering their brain settings. Suddenly the songwriting becomes deeper, cleverer, more personal, like someone upgraded their emotional firmware. Norwegian Wood introduces George's sitar, a sound so unusual in Western pop that listeners thought their radio was broken. In My Life shows John reflecting on childhood, friendships, mortality, basically a midlife crisis at age 25. Nowhere Man has John confronting the idea of losing himself, the voice of someone who's seen the world and still feels strangely empty. Paul gets into storytelling. George gets into Indian spirituality. John gets into introspection and substances. Ringo remains Ringo, the emotional glue nobody talks about enough. Rubber Soul changes everything because it proves one thing. The Beatles don't just want to make hits. They want to make meaning, but they aren't done evolving. Right after this creative awakening, George drags the band deeper into Indian music and Eastern philosophy. He studies sitar seriously, learns from Ravi Shankar, starts reading spiritual texts, And suddenly, the Beatles' world opens up beyond guitars and Liverpool humor. The experimentation gets contagious. John starts writing songs like a man peeling back his own brain. Paul becomes obsessed with composition and arrangement, writing melodies like puzzles. Ringo adapts to every weird musical idea they throw at him with the patience of a saint who has seen too much. And that leads them to 1966, where the Beatles take the biggest leap of their career. Revolver. This album is not just different, it's alien. It's fearless. It doesn't care about radio expectations or teen fans or chart formulas. It's the Beatles saying, "We're done playing it safe. Time to get weird." Songs like Tomorrow Never Knows sound like the future. A psychedelic tornado made of tape loops, reversed guitars, and John singing like a monk from space. Eleanor Rigby is a string quartet drama about loneliness and death. A pop song with zero guitars and maximum emotional damage. Taxman shows George turning into a full-on social commentator. And Your Bird Can Sing has harmonies so tight you can practically hear Paul and John glaring at each other while singing. Revolver marks the moment the Beatles stop being a band and start being a laboratory. They are experimenting with sound, with meaning, with technology, with their identities, even with reality itself. They stop touring because they can't recreate this music live, and because playing concerts became a weird circus where no one listens anyway. So 1966 becomes the year the Beatles retreat from the world and dive fully into the studio, building worlds instead of just songs. Rubber Soul was the awakening. Revolver is the transformation. And together, these years show the Beatles finally becoming what they were meant to be. Not just performers, but artists shaping the future of music itself. The Pepperland Experiment. By 1967, the Beatles are no longer the Beatles. Not the Mop Tops. Not the suit-wearing charmers. Not the She Loves You good boys. They have evolved. The year begins in a haze of creativity, exhaustion, curiosity, and grief. Because in late '66, the Beatles stopped touring, and for the first time since fame swallowed them whole, they are free. No screaming crowds, no death threat tours in the Philippines. No, will they get shot in the South? Shows in America. Just studio time. Endless, delicious studio time. And then John writes something unexpected. Strawberry Fields Forever. It's dreamy. It's surreal. It's John's childhood melting into psychedelia. It sounds like nostalgia dipped in LSD and stirred with a mellotron. Paul responds with Penny Lane, the sunnier reflection of Liverpool memories. Like two sides of the same neighborhood, but one is whimsical and the other is staring at ghosts. These songs aren't just music. They're signals. Signals that the Beatles are about to enter their weirdest era ever. SGT. Pepper, the band within the band. One day, Paul gets an idea, a very Paul idea. What if we stop being the Beatles and we become a fake band instead? And the others go, sure, why not? Reality is optional now. Thus is born the grand concept, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The album where the Beatles cosplay as a Victorian circus rock group with brass, mustaches, orchestras, and enough color to blind a small village. This isn't an album, it's a full-on hallucination with sleeve notes. For months, the Beatles live in the studio. They're experimenting with every sound imaginable. Tape loops, orchestral swells, pianos slowed down until they cry, drums that sound like cannons, and engineers who are thinking, are we even allowed to do this? Each track becomes a world. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. A kaleidoscope wonderland based on a drawing by little Julian Lennon. And no, John insists, totally not about drugs. Being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, John builds a circus out of a poster he found in an antique shop and demands the engineer create the sound of a carnival, but like, underwater and possessed. A Day in the Life. The masterpiece, a song that feels like waking up, living, dying, and dreaming all in 4 haunting minutes. Two worlds stitched together, John's existential drift, Paul's everyday rush, and an orchestra sprinting toward the apocalypse. When Sgt. Pepper releases in June 1967, it sends shockwaves. Music critics don't just praise it, they panic, because it feels like the future arrived early and nobody had the manual. The album becomes a cultural event, a revolution, a permission slip for musicians everywhere to get weird, bold, artistic, and then the dark cloud. But 1967 isn't all Technicolor bliss. In August, tragedy strikes. Brian Epstein, their longtime manager, dies suddenly. The man who kept the chaos organized is gone. The Beatles are stunned. Grief hits them like a tidal wave. John later says that Brian's death was the beginning of the end. For the first time since their rise, no one is steering the ship, and slowly, quietly, small cracks form. But in these final months of unity, before the storm hits, the Beatles produce some of their most iconic, most imaginative, most reality-bending music ever. 1967 is their brightest year, and the first whisper that things may never be the same again. The Apple years. By 1968, the Beatles had officially decided, why just be musicians when we can also be CEOs, accountants, philanthropists, and chaos managers at the same time? Enter Apple Corps, their very own company that somehow survived despite being run by four eccentric musicians who barely agree on what time it is. Imagine this: meetings about contracts, arguments about office decor, someone buying 3 pianos when no one asked for even one, George Harrison threatening to quit over literally anything, Ringo walking out in protest, and John and Paul are probably drawing doodles on the board instead of paying attention. Amid all this chaos, the Beatles are also recording what becomes the White Album, officially titled The Beatles, but everyone calls it the one that looks like a blank sheet of paper. And yes, it's huge, messy, chaotic, genius. This album is basically 4 solo albums glued together, because each Beatle now wants to say, I'm the best Beatle at this moment, and you will hear it. John goes raw, angry, and experimental. He writes Year Blues, Revolution, and Julia, songs full of emotion, intensity, and sometimes darkness. He experiments with sound like a mad scientist. Paul goes melodic, playful, reflective. Back in the USSR has him doing cheeky parody while keeping a perfect beat. Obla Di, Obla Da sounds like a children's party on a Saturday afternoon. Helter Skelter is basically the proto-metal moment, showing Paul could hit harder than anyone suspected. George, quietly but dramatically, drops masterpieces like While My Guitar Gently Weeps. He finally gets the chance to shine after years of being the quiet genius in the background. His solos are emotional, soaring, and unforgettable. Ringo, yes, even Ringo claims his moment with Don't Pass Me By, a charming, oddball song reminding everyone that Ringo is the glue that keeps this madness slightly coherent. The White Album is chaotic. It's scattered. It's contradictory. You have mellow acoustic songs followed by heavy proto-metal, followed by avant-garde experimental tracks. Fans are either in awe or completely confused, sometimes both. Meanwhile, the Apple years chaos continues. Studio arguments, business meetings, and personal tensions bleed into the recordings. There are moments when they can barely tolerate being in the same room, but somehow that friction fuels creativity. And let's not forget the Paul is dead whispers are still alive. Fans overanalyze the album covers, the lyrics, the guitar solos, even the way Ringo taps the drums. Everything is fair game. Every note is a potential conspiracy clue. By the end of 1969, Apple Corps and the White Album sessions leave the Beatles exhausted, tested, and creatively victorious. They've survived the chaos of running a company, maintaining fame, and experimenting musically. The White Album becomes a monument to their individuality, their talent, and their ability to turn personal conflict into art. The Apple years shows, even in chaos, even in disunity, genius finds a way. It's messy, it's weird, it's beautiful, and it's completely, unmistakably Beatles. The Long Goodbye Sessions. By 1969, the Beatles are a band at the peak of both genius and exhaustion. The arguments are real, the tension is palpable, but somehow, magically, the music remains untouchable. Enter Abbey Road, an album that feels like a carefully orchestrated farewell gift. even before anyone officially left. From the first track, you can sense the perfectionism. Paul's bass lines are precise, melodic, and almost conversational, like he's speaking directly to your soul without saying a word. John adds grit, personality, and subtle sarcasm. George delivers Here Comes the Sun and Something, which aren't just songs, they're emotional sunrises captured in audio form. Ringo plays every beat like he knows he's holding the band together with drumsticks. The medley on side 2 is the pièce de résistance. It's a patchwork of unfinished sketches, demos, and musical fragments stitched into a single sweeping story. Every song flows into the next like chapters in a diary you didn't know existed. There's humor, pathos, energy, and nostalgia, all packed into 1/2 hour. Recording Abbey Road wasn't without chaos. John and Paul argue over phrasing, tempo, and sometimes just breathing. George wants his guitars front and center. Ringo occasionally walks out when it gets too heated, but somehow through all this tension, the magic never stops. Meanwhile, fans can't stop obsessing. Paul is still alive, yes, but conspiracy theories linger. Even the cover photo, 4 men crossing a street, is overanalyzed endlessly. The world is obsessed, and the Beatles are, quietly, exhausted by the attention. By the time they sing the final line of the end, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make, you can feel the weight of their journey. They are saying goodbye, not with anger or drama, but with a mix of relief, pride, and bittersweet nostalgia. After Abbey Road, the Beatles start drifting apart officially. Solo projects, different creative directions, and personal lives pull them in separate ways. But this album is the proof that even at the very end, when tensions, egos, and fatigue were at their peak, 4 people could come together to create something perfect. Abbey Road is more than music. It's the ultimate last bow. The Beatles saying, "We made it, we did it, and maybe, just maybe, we'll never top this." And that's okay. It's the end of an era, the closing of a chapter, the final note in a story that began in Liverpool basements. And it's beautiful, messy, human, and completely unmistakably Beatles.